Well,
There's a kid.
welcome to the 11th annual series of the Jim Lafayette Memorial Series of Writers of the Fantastic. And it's hard to believe, as I was just saying with Anne Lafayette, who is with us tonight, how amazing it is that this is the 11th year. And we've been able to bring all kinds of interesting writers to Norwich, and I'm hoping that tonight will be a worthy continuation, and in fact we have even more. So before I introduce our speaker for tonight, Paul Defilippo, I will tell you that there's going to be one more Lafayette Memorial lecture this year. Writer Bret Cox, who we've known since he was a young kid and is now a professor at Norwich University in Vermont, and a writer of science fiction and horror, is going to be here the weekend before Halloween, talking about his collection of New England-related horror and other things related to my specialty, the Gothic in New England. So that's going to be October the 27th, Saturday before Halloween. Unusually, it's going to be a Saturday afternoon. This series, as I think almost everyone in this room knows, but it's worth repeating, is in memory and in honor of Jim Lafayette, who lived his short life here in Norwich and was a writer and an artist and a collector of science fiction, and would have had, I think, a wonderful career. And his generous parents donated his collection to the library and have been, of course, supporters of the library before and since. And so I think that in Jewish tradition, there's an expression that the memory of the righteous is a blessing. And I think that this is a wonderful way to remember him and things that he loved so well. So, Paul Defilippo is, besides being a prolific writer and critic and reviewer of everything fantastic, you may have seen his reviews on the Barnes & Noble website or in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction and lots of other places. Has also been my friend for many, many years. Like what?
You can say it, 45
45 years. 45 years.
We were 7 years old.
Yeah, somebody once asked me how long I'd been playing the piano, and I said 60 years. And she said, "Oh, you learned to play before you were born." But Paul has been publishing almost that long, and has really is going to tell you a little bit about a kind of survey of high spots of his career. But he is also going to be reading to you from his most recently published novel, which represents a departure for him in that there is nothing supernatural or fantastic or counter to fact in it, except that it's fiction, The Big Get Even, which is a crime caper novel, and the first of a series, right? You've already finished the second one. So, without further ado, Paul Defilippo.
Well, no one could ask for a better introduction, and I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight, and the library for sponsoring this, and of course the Jim Lafayette Fund for being the initiator of all this wonderfulness. And Bret Cox, who's coming in the fall. I didn't realize that. He's a wonderful writer, very charming and personable fellow, so I think if you can make it, you probably should. So anyhow, Faye mentioned that we've known each other for so long, and that I had been publishing almost as long, and my career actually got kind of a, I don't know if you'd call it a false start, but kind of an anomalous or premature start in that I sold a story in 1977, so that's, Faye and I met in 73, so that wasn't long after we met, and I sold my first professional story in 77, and I was still in college at the time, and it kind of didn't go anywhere because I was so young, and I had, you know, college to deal with and life to deal with, and so I didn't really pursue it because I didn't have the drive or the chops or the skills to really make a career out of things at that point. But it did kind of at least point the way that yes, I could produce something that was publishable and people would buy it and read it and like it if they were so inclined. So that was a nice token that maybe there was a career in writing ahead for me. Then I left college and got probably my best paying job to date, which was as a computer programmer, and if I had stuck with that, I'd be retired now with a nice nest egg instead of worrying about the wolf at the door as freelance writers tend to do. But in any case, I did that for a few years, and I said to myself, gee, you know, a few years ago I sold a story. I wonder if I could ever kind of pick up that thread of activity again and see if I could make something of it. So I quit my day job and started writing, and besides being inspired by all the science fiction I had read as a kid and a young adult, and I think that's so important. You know, writers always don't emerge from a vacuum. They start out as, most of them, as inveterate, dedicated readers and fans, and you learn, you know, what type of fiction you would like to write and who you'd like to emulate and who your role models are. So besides all the reading I had done, there was one kind of mentor or figure that I looked up to, and that was a name that I bet all of you will recognize, and that's Ray Bradbury, who was such a classic, famous writer, and you know, died about 5 or 7 years ago. He had a very influential essay that was called Zen and the Art of Writing, and he talked about his own beginnings and what he recommended beginning writers to do. And he was very, he didn't tolerate slackers very well. He was very adamant about showing some diligence and dedication, and he said, you've got to try to write about 1,000 words a day. And if you can do that, you'll finish a story a week, you know, a 7,000 word story. You can do it in a week, and then on Monday you start the next story. You start writing another 1,000 words. And so this was, he said, that's how I did it, and you know, here I am today, and so I recommend this particular pursuit. So I said, okay, I'm going to do it. And for the first year after I quit my day job, I did succeed. I wrote about 50 stories in that year, sent them out into the marketplace, into the vast, cold, uncaring marketplace, and didn't sell a single one. But the process, which a lot of you might have heard of, is that, you know, you send out your fiction, you get these standard form letter rejections, and then like, you know, after 6 months of that, maybe the form letter comes back and there's a little editorial scribble at the bottom. It says, nice try, looking forward to the next one, or whatever. And so, and then you might ramp up to an actual, you know, typed personal letter from the editor saying why your story stinks. Eventually after that first year, I sold something and never quite looked back, and that was 35 years ago. And in that 35 years, I've managed to publish, it's pretty much exactly 35 books. So the books didn't start coming until later, but they've averaged out to like one a year for all the years that I've been pursuing this crazy thing. So in any case, my initial passion and love was science fiction, fantasy, horror, any kind of strange kind of fiction. There's a critical term that people have devised in the field called Slipstream Fiction, which is kind of nebulous borderline fiction, like it might on the surface seem to be naturalistic or traditional or mimetic, but then as you read it, there's weird things happening. So that's kind of on the fringes of the more obvious science fiction. And fantasy, I always like that kind of fiction. So I began to write in the science fiction genre. But at the same time, I was always a lover of mystery novels and crime novels. They were kind of like the candy or dessert of after I had studied, you know, science fiction and stuff. I'd pick up a crime novel and I could just kind of turn off my analytical brain because I didn't think that I would ever write a crime novel per se, and I would just read it for pure pleasure. But somehow the form and the modes of the crime novel kind of insinuated themselves into my brain, and naturally I began to think analytically about them, and maybe I could write a crime novel. So at some point I started writing an occasional hybrid type story, a blended kind of story that mixed science fiction and mystery, detection, crime, however you care to phrase it. And I certainly wasn't the originator of this, because this kind of hybrid fusion of crime and science fiction goes way back. I don't know who you might assign as the originator of it, but one of the famous people who did it was Isaac Asimov, a very well-known famous science fiction writer. He had several novels that fused science fiction and crime. There was The Naked Sun and Caves of Steel. Those were two very famous ones. And even during the 1950s, somebody like Alfred Bester, who was, you know, as pure a science fiction writer as you could get, very rich in concepts and speculation and science fictional ideas. Even a book of his, like The Demolished Man, is very much a fusion of this science fiction and crime. So loving crime novels as I did, I decided I would occasionally try to, you know, follow this kind of hybrid storytelling. And so this book, this is one of my early books called Ribofunk. And the term is a neologism that I created myself, and that might require a little bit of hopefully interesting background. So during the 80s, the mid-80s, there was a certain kind of science fiction that came to prominence, and it was called cyberpunk. And that in itself was another made-up word. And the person who crafted that, they took cyber from cybernetics, the study of information theory and computers and so forth, all the good, you know, digital stuff that was just coming to prominence in the 80s. So they took cyber as their prefix, and then they, if you recall, I think everyone here might know of punk music, which was very prominent in the 70s and 80s. So the person was named Bruce Bethke, who coined this term, and he fused cyber and punk, and it was meant to connote a kind of fiction that was very digitally savvy and would examine, you know, the future from a very realistic perspective of what was happening in the sciences. So that was the cyber portion, but then the punk portion would be kind of a rebellious outlaw attitude that would permeate this kind of fiction. So I started writing cyberpunk fiction in the 80s, but then I thought to myself that there was something lacking, and that was that genetic engineering was coming to prominence also, along with the rise of the computers that we come to rely on today. So genetic engineering was an ongoing technology or revolution in the sciences, And I thought that Cyberpunk was not focusing closely enough on that, and that you could write a kind of fiction that really focused on kind of like the wet, squishy, weird, organic things that were going to happen in the future. And so I coined this word ribofunk. I took ribo from like ribonucleic acid as a prefix, and funk would be the alternate kind of music, because these stories would not be punk kind of outlaw, nihilistic, rebellious. They would be like as if James Brown was writing science fiction, or if Prince, who wasn't around then, was writing science fiction. You know, these would be kind of upbeat, very catchy stories, and so I kind of pioneered this type of fiction on my own. And if you actually Google the word ribofunk today, you'll get a fair number of hits. But what happened was, and I was kind of slightly disappointed in this, is that a lot of fans and critics took the obvious transition from cyberpunk, and they coined the term biopunk, which is okay. But I don't think the punk part is really applicable, and the bio part was just kind of too obvious. I considered that, you know, when I was coining my word. So actually, like if you go to Wikipedia, there's an entry on biopunk, and then like there's a footnote that says was also called ribofunk by Paul Defilippo. You know, so that's all right. I'll take that. You know, it's better to be a footnote in history than not have any legend at all. So anyway. These are biopunk stories, and I did one of them. Now these stories are all set in a consistent future, and I want to say, in case any of you are big-hearted enough to go to the library and withdraw the Ribofunk volume and you start reading it, I want to warn you right now that in the very first story we find an allusion to President Trump. Okay, I'm not responsible. I'm not responsible for this, but I just want you to know this book was copyright 1996, and the original story appeared a couple of years earlier. And you know, Trump's been in the news for so long that everybody knew him back in '96 as this kind of, you know, blowhard, you know, guy who wanted a lot of public attention and stuff, and I said, well, he's going to be president someday, and I alluded to it in the first story. And in fact, throughout this book, Trump with the lowercase t has been turned into an adjective in the future. So that quite hasn't happened yet, but I did. You know, the next time they tell you, like, oh yeah, H.G. Wells predicted the atomic bomb and armored tanks, you say, that's nothing. You know, Defilippo predicted President Trump. So you can say, you know, that doesn't. H.G. Wells was a piker. So these stories are all set in a connected future. And characters bop in and out of, you know, they appear here and there, like they might be the protagonist in one story and then just a little cameo role in the next story. But two of the stories are back-to-back. They feature the same protagonist narrating the events, and he's a private investigator. You never learn his name. That was Dashiell Hammett had a famous detective whose name was never revealed, and you know, I thought that was kind of cool, so I imitated Hammett. That's how we learn. But you never learn his name. But he's a private investigator in this weird organic future, and so I'll give you a little bit, just the opening of this story. And this is all leading up to a little background explaining why I somehow ended up with a pure crime novel. So this story is called, excuse me, I should probably have a little water here. This story is called The Boot. And I should tell you, because you don't see in just the introduction, you know how your car can get the boot where you come back and you owe so many parking tickets and you've got that clamp on your wheel. Well, this is a boot for people. When you want to immobilize someone, you slap the boot on the back of their neck. So this is the boot. I was sitting in my office feeling as bored as the caretaker of a New Mexico solar farm on a cloudy day and wishing for a client. After 2 months of inactivity, I didn't much care what kind any client would do. A socket looking for her runaway plug, a Jerry wanting a line to the hottest new semi-illegal Golden Age dream scene. This year, the 100th anniversary of Woodstock made that particular nostalgia wear top of the bops, especially for the original attendees who still survived. Or maybe I'd be hired by a 10-year-old hoping to silicone slide his way through the legal thicket that blocked his path to full franchise. I'd even settle for a grieved and angry spouse itching to get the burst on the mate she suspected of weekly sex change flings. I had had them all before at one time or another, and no doubt would get them all again someday. And when I did, I'd take their effed and I'd do what they wanted, no questions asked. Someone with finances as precarious as mine couldn't afford the same scruples as your average Trumps and Forbeses. There's the word. It's an orgy-doggy, eat-orgy-doggy world, after all. But right now, it looked like I wouldn't have to worry too much about exercising my ethics. It was already noon, and the day was shaping up as dull as a debate between the Green and Conservative candidates for governor of Cuba. In other words, it was an instant replay of the past 60. Outside my self-cleaning windows, sunlight glinted off the Charles River. On the far bank bulks the black silicobe-built bubble that the authorities had hastily erected around MIT 10 years ago. The hemisphere visible above ground continued below, forming a completely enclosed sphere. It had gone up in less than 24 hours, but it had seemed like as many days. I remembered watching from my front row seat, along with the rest of the world, as divisions of the NU militia, guided by top Cricks and Watsons, kept the mock-life tendrils and feelers at bay, with water cannons pumping enzymatic lysine fluid, until the silicobes could complete their container. No one knew what, if anything, was now going on inside that shell. There hadn't been time to engineer any sensors in. The dome was still patrolled around the clock. It was just another thing you lived with. I was thinking about popping open a cheer beer when I heard footsteps in the hall outside my door. I hastily took my feet down off my desk and tried to project the image that I was busier than a four-armed bartender at happy hour. The footsteps didn't go past my door as so many had before. Instead, there came a knock. I checked the security screen, liked what I saw, and said, "Come in." The door unlatched itself and swung open. She had on a stylish suit in acidic purple and orange. The jacket had asymmetrical lapels trimmed with blue vat-grown mink. On the larger lapel was pinned an orchidea that I could smell from 6 feet away. Her skirt hung down to her ankles on the left side, but revealed her whole right leg, and she had on heels that added 4 inches to her height. Her black curly hair was piled high, with one blonde curl dangling down over her forehead. She had canary yellow irises and a small, tight mouth. On one cheek, she wore a small love cicatrice shaped like the astrological symbols of Venus. "Please," she said, "could you cover those windows? Lady, we're on the 40th floor. You can't tell what optics are out there. Please, nanocams are everywhere these days. Just do it." I shrugged and spoke. Shutters. Sheets of opaque piezo-plastic that had been curled up at the top of the window stiffened down like tongues across the glass under the impulse of a mild electric current. I boosted the lights. "Have a seat," I offered Can I get you something to drink? She sat and crossed her bare right leg over the left. I saw the tattoo of a panther she wore on her outer upper thigh. Every 30 seconds it opened its mouth in a silent snarl. Well, yes, thank you. I'll have a foam of froth if you've got it. I kicked the splice sleeping at my feet. Hamster, wake up, we've got a visitor. Hamster opened its eyes and blinked, it preened its whiskers and said, yes, sir, my help is needed now. That's damn right, you dumb trans. Get a cheer beer for me and a foam of froth for the lady. Hamster got up and adjusted its short tunic. It walked to the small magnetic fridge, got the drinks, served them, and then asked, will that be all that is needful, sir? Yeah, go back to sleep. Hamster did just that. Oh, that's the cheapest transgenic they make, I apologize. She waved her hand negligently. That's no matter. My name is Geneva Hippenstyle Imhausen. May I see your licenses? I passed my ID card over. Showing topmost was my Massachusetts PI license. She repeatedly flexed the card to reveal my North American Union license, Eurocom, IMF, Brazilian, and orbital credentials. She flexed it one time in a naked pinup of the Thridvid star Susie Sex Crime, and one of her more notorious poses was revealed. I had to admire Geneva's composure. No expression, just a faint reddening of her cicatrice. She handed the card back. This seems to reveal everything I need to know about you. Well, that puts you a leg up on me, I said, eyeing the leg in question. Could I ask what you're here for? She leaned forward. I want you to put a boot on someone. Well, that took me by surprise. I wouldn't have guessed that was what she needed. You do boots, don't you? She asked, lifting her one neatly scribed eyebrow. Oh, yeah, sure, but they're a little tricky. It'll cost more than my average rates. No matter, there is very much at stake. I mentally raised my rates by half again. I'll need to know more before I can definitely take the case. Who are you booting, and what does he have that's not his? She sighed. It's my husband, Jürgen von Bülow. He's made off with the latest trope from the company I own. Perhaps you've heard of Hippensteel Imhausen. We're a German firm specializing in bioactives. Our most recent product is still in the experimental stages. It's an explosive new neurotrope, and even to speak of it now is rather risky. That's why I wanted the shutters down. And I assume your office has recently been swept. I nodded, and she continued rather reluctantly. What my husband took is a trope that allows stochastic reasoning, insight into the dynamics of chaos. We were hoping to have it perfected before word of it reached our competitors. But my husband absconded with some doses of a test batch, and he plans to use them. He'll ruin our secrecy, and if anyone ever got to him and unwound the codes from his bloodstream, well, there go our patents. Well, why did your husband steal from his own company? Doesn't he stand to gain from any eventual profits? Geneva looked both disgusted and embarrassed. My husband married into the company. I control it. He's something of a wastrel, and I had to keep him on a short leash. Apparently it was all too galling, and now he's finally slipped it. Well, I don't understand enough about this new trope. How's he going to use it? What makes you so sure he won't just run and sell it to one of your rivals? No, that's not his plan. You see, he loves to gamble, and this trope, you're not claiming to let him beat the odds? She nodded. That's exactly right. He'll gain insight into the underlying patterns of apparently random events. Mother of mutants, this was big. I redoubled my fees. The regular authorities? Oh, too many leaks. I need a single man. I stood up then and walked around to her side. I raised a hand to her face. She didn't flinch. I lightly dragged my roughened thumb over her cicatrice. The love scar was packed with more pleasure receptors and nerve paths than a 10th generation biochip. When she climaxed, her panther reared up on its hind legs. After she opened her eyes, I said, "I'll bet you do." So, obviously a lot of Raymond Chandler, you know, maybe, I don't know if you can picture Humphrey Bogart in this role, but, you know, the typical. So, having done that story, and the second one that features this fellow, he's, something traumatic happens at the end of the book, and he quits being a private eye and he goes to work for the establishment, so to speak. He becomes a member of the protein police, which are the cops of the future looking for rogue organisms and such. And so that story follows immediately. It's called Blanky, like a child's toy blanket. So having done that story on my own, my next foray into the world of crime fiction was a straight, naturalistic, mimetic crime novels, two of them, and Faye might have, she probably remembered, but took a shortcut over them. So I have to backtrack a minute. I have a good friend who's another science fiction writer. His name is Michael Bishop.
Was also a Lafayette.
Who also spoke here, right, at the library. Yes, a wonderful writer, and you should track down his books, very entertaining. So Michael and I were tossing the blue sky notions around of what we would work on next, and we thought we would like to collaborate, but for some reason we got the notion that our collaboration should be a mystery novel, and we did it. We did 2 mystery novels, and we sold them both, and they tanked abysmally. I guess they sold a few copies here and there, but we had a third one in mind to complete the series, and nobody was unrolling the red carpet in front of us. So to this day, we still haven't done the third one. But they were a lot of fun. The first one, and I was very proud of this title. This was my contribution, one of my contributions to the project. The title is "Would It Kill You to Smile?" And I thought that was a great kind of quasi hard-boiled or mysterious title. So we did that one, and our little hook, our tiny little hook, was that every title was going to be in the form of a question. And so the next one we were determined to use a famous line from The Wizard of Oz, and it was going to be, what makes the muskrat guard its musk? And so you can tell what great commercial instincts we had. And I mean, it appealed to us. It was very whimsical and stuff. And so we wrote the book and we sent it to the editor, and he said, "I like this book, but you ain't going to call it What Makes the Muskrat Guard Its Musk." And so the title got truncated or altered to Muskrat Courage, which always sounds, what was that famous? Muskrat Love. It sounds like that awful, abominable song from the 70s, Muskrat Love. So anyway, those 2 books entered the world, and we were proud of them. We thought we did a good job. And they actually got collected in an omnibus version too. The 2 of them were in one between 2 covers, and it was called "Families Are Murder," which I thought was a neat title. So, but during the process of writing those books, and they were our hero was a Southerner. Mike Bishop has lived in Georgia for like 40 years, although he's not native to the state. But our hero was a Southerner who was not a private eye per se, but he had like 2 incidents in his life that involved him in these kind of violent crime-related situations. So right away, the hero of our books was more towards Michael's end of thing, and he is. I grew up reading Michael Bishop, even though he's not much older than me. He's like, I don't know, I don't think he's even 10 years older than me, but he started just early enough that when I was a teenager, I was reading his stories, and this is another aspect of the writing life, is that sometimes you get to hang out with your heroes if everything goes well. You know, you eventually, your careers intersect, and it was amazing to me that, you know, we were able to work together. But because he was I always regarded him as like the senior partner in our little firm. And so anytime there was a divergence of opinion on how to do these books, I always deferred to Michael, let him have it his way, and I was happy to do so. But the experience was slightly unsatisfying because I felt that these mystery novels were not entirely my 100% brainchild. So, but they were good experience, and having that experience was very valuable towards doing my solo project. So a few years ago, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago, I said, what am I going to do next? That's always the question that writers ask themselves, and there is never any surcease of accomplishment. As soon as you finish something, the next step is, well, okay, I can't rest on my laurels, I have to do something different, something new. So I said, let me try this crime novel that I've had in mind for a while. And the result is this, The Big Get Even. And I should mention real quickly, since I went to the trouble of printing it out, I haven't abandoned science fiction. This is an upcoming story collection called Infinite Fantastica. It'll be due out in September. So I'm still writing science fiction. But I turned my hand to the crime novel, and I was very happy that this I think kind of attractive cover, which actually wraps around, this is like a literal transcription of my verbal description. They asked me, this firm, Blackstone Publishing, is so nice, I've never worked with nicer people, and they got the art director to say to me, you know, what's your vision of this cover? And I said, well, there's a seedy-looking motel, and a woman and some men and a cheap car and other stuff, and this is the result. So they actually do occasionally listen to the author. So in any case, this came out in March, so it's not even half a year old. And I have no idea, got a couple of nice reviews. The New York Times was not in love with it, I'll just say that, but the person they have reviewing mysteries, I knew that it wasn't going to be her cup of tea, so I was kind of prepared for her not to like it. But as people have they take a lot of compassion when it looks like you're going to cry, and they say, oh, well, any attention is good, you know, even if she didn't like it 100%, so I try to keep that in mind.
She didn't hate it, though.
No, she was meh about it, you know, so.
Publishers Weekly loved it.
Yes, that's what I always tell myself.
But
So,
I mentioned that
yeah.
Blackstone, it's kind of an experiment for Blackstone.
Yeah, so Blackstone Publishing is the second biggest audiobook people after Audible. I don't know, audiobooks are so popular these days, some of you folks might use them. And Blackstone is second after Audible in terms of audiobooks, and they decided that I guess they would venture into print publishing. So they don't have a huge backlist of print titles. This is it's nice to kind of get in on the ground floor, and they're doing some science fiction also. So The Big Get Even, I had that title in my notebook for ages and ages and ages before I thought of a plot and characters and story to go with it. And so after I was well into the novel, I said, you know, there's something about that title. I did not create that title. I said, I heard that, I wrote it, and I should illustrate what I'm talking about here. I always carry around a good old-fashioned pocket notebook, and when ideas strike me, I jot them down. So I said, I wrote that down, I heard that somewhere, where the hell did I hear it? And so, of course, nowadays we can track everything down. Guess where the big get even comes from? A Stevie Nicks song. So it's a highly unlikely source for a crime novel. I don't associate Stevie Nicks with noir fiction that much, but I think it works. You know, so I hope if she ever sees this novel, she doesn't totally hate it or think I ruined her phraseology. So what I'm going to do is this, I'll read the prologue, so you probably don't need to know any more about it, because if you were, you know, a reader just coming to the book, this is all you would know, the very first pages. But it's a kind of a caper novel. It's not a mystery per se, because you always there's no secret or no identities are hidden. You know, everything is known. And in fact, the novel is narrated by one of the bad guys, and I call him a bad guy, but it's him and his partner, kind of amiable. They just want something for nothing, as so many of us occasionally feel, and you know, they want a shortcut to riches, and they both transgressed against society in certain nonviolent or you know, not particularly hateful ways. So there are a couple of lovable losers. Hopefully, that's what I was aiming for. So the narrator begins the story that he's going to tell us this way. These days, I obey all the laws, even the stupid ones. With 3 years of parole still hanging around my neck, I can't afford to put a foot wrong. Too many vindictive people, mostly those I had stolen large sums of money from and who were never recompensed and were never going to get recompensed, would be delighted to see my ass back in jail. This newly civic-minded attitude of mine explained why I was sitting at a traffic light, idling behind another car at 3:20 a.m. on a frigid December night, while the exhaust-belching beater ahead of me hadn't moved for 3 full cycles of green, yellow, red. Even though no other car had passed through the intersection in any direction for several minutes, I didn't want to just zoom around this blockhead, just in case a police cruiser should happen to swing by at that very moment. I had just enjoyed 3 generous mojitos over as many hours at Danny's Cavern. So, while by my reckoning I was still sober as an owl, I didn't want a chance blowing even a hair over the legal limit. But my patience was wearing thin. Not that I had anyone waiting for me at home or any job to get up for in the morning. Nonetheless, I still focused my growing annoyance on the back of the driver's shaggy head, spotlighted in the muted blue radiance of the corner streetlight. I tried to send a telepathic message to move. No luck. Was he busy looking at his cell phone? I applauded his considerate wisdom in not texting while his car was in motion, but my inconvenience had to count for something. Finally, I did what I had been avoiding for fear of waking up this whole very proper suburban neighborhood where we sat frozen in place. I lay on my horn for an ear-splitting second or two. I might as well have whispered at him for all the response I got. With a long, self-pitying sigh that felt all too familiarly satisfying, I put my car in park, and, leaving the motor running, I stepped out. The cold air hit me like falling into a mountain stream. With the clean scent of approaching winter stinging my nostrils, I crunched over the gritty ice on the roadway to the guy's door. My first impression was he was your standard look. Ugly, handsome, wearing a leather jacket unzipped over a garish sweater, which was cut low enough to reveal a thatch of chest hair adorned with a gold chain. I had seen his type often enough coming through the law offices, usually seeking our help against one minor felony charge or another. But my second quick impression told me the guy was dead. His face was pale and clammy like a frog's belly. His lips were bluish, and not just from the streetlight. His eyes stared without seeing. His pupils were the size of poppy seeds. His stiff right leg, foot jammed on the brake, was the only thing keeping his car from moving. I jerked open the door and brought my head close to his. Got a whiff of booze and body spray. Faint but stertorous breathing told me he hadn't quite croaked, and then I knew what had hit him. I'd seen it often enough before. I sprinted back to my car and I grabbed the Narcan kit from under the front seat. I fumbled out the nasal injector and I sprinted back to the Mook's car. I had to wrangle him to tilt his head back and maximize the dose. Then the car started to roll forward and I abandoned him for the shifter. After slamming it into park, I pushed the injector deep into one nostril and I blasted the naloxone up into his skull, and then I laid him back down in the seat. Almost immediately, his condition improved. His breathing got easier, his skin changed color, and he began to twitch. If only this miracle stuff had been around when I was using, but it wasn't, and I had seen several of my dope friends buy the farm for lack of it. Then I called the cops on my cell. They wore it up in no time, as if they were actors waiting just off stage for their cue. Their strobe lights painted the scene as if for an early credits. One cop went to attend the Mook while the other came to me. The blonde, smooth-faced kid questioning me looked so young and earnest, I felt like my own father. But he still regarded me with that innate suspicion all cops quickly develop, as if I must be guilty of something. Your name? Glenn McClinton. I already had my license out. You called us in? Yes, and I explained the circumstances. Please wait right here. He went back to the car and ran my information. When he returned, he was trying his best not to look especially crafty, and I resigned myself to some further hassle. Mr. McClinton, the terms of your parole do not include a prohibition on alcohol, so I won't ask you to take a breathalyzer test. You seem quite sober. I hope you'll appreciate this special consideration. Thanks. I suspected what was next. Okay then, so maybe then you'll be up front with me. I need to know, were you meeting this person to make a heroin buy? I was not. I've been clean for over 2 years. And yet you carry a Narcan kit with you. Well, you know, I just don't like seeing people die if I can help it. Isn't it quite a coincidence that an ex